welcome back guys. Part 2 of how to paint the Leviathan Terminator Captain. If you haven't already, watch the first episode, but here we go. Okay, so this is our captain as he stands from the last video. As you can see, battle ready, but actually not that much detail. So we're going to continue on and add some more detail. So one thing I missed out from the last video, which is a really simple thing to do, we've got his lovely top feathers there. We're just going to use apothecary white to add some detail into there. You'll see as I'm adding it to contrast paint. The reason why apothecary white works really well is because it's got a little bit of blue inside of it. Sounds a bit odd, but obviously to add a bit of detail and highlight the cracks for those white gaps there, just a little bit of a grey blue does the job nicely. All I'm doing is spreading it, making sure that it sits in the recesses. There we go, nicely done. Okay, so next bit of highlighting, we're going to look at these purity seals. Now there are many different ways that people do it, and as I said, I like to keep mine slightly yellow, give them a little bit more of a aged look. So I'm going to go back in with Zandri dust, make sure that it's thinned down, and we just want a light bit on the brush there. As you can see, using my painting board there just to make sure that I've got the right amount on. So as I'm adding onto this tabard here, you can see that I'm focusing on the flatter areas and trying to avoid anything that's going to be covered over by a natural shadow. Very thin paint, and the wash that's sat underneath should show through. Again, where I can, to access these tricky areas, just tilting the model round and making sure that I leave a little bit of a recess between those two. So, time to speed through the rest. Here we go. You can see, same technique, really trying to catch the bit where there's those upper wrinkles. All the way around, looking good. Okay, so we've actually now gone back to that first purity seal, and you might think, well, you've already done that, but I'm going over it with a very thin second layer, just on the really raised edge bits, and again, trying my best to add some flowing folds, shadows, whatever I can to my purity seals. Okay, back to the Captain Stormbolter now. So this is one of the only real flat areas that was darkened down by using our shade earlier. So all I'm simply doing is making sure that I've got a slightly thinned wet coat of the Castellan green going back over, and wherever there's a bit of a recess that's really caught the shade, trying to avoid that just to make sure that that really shows any corners and detail. All the way around, really carefully. Nicely done. Okay, sticking with the theme of big flat areas, we've got our cloak again. So I've shaken up my pot of Caliban green, and again, all I'm trying to do, nice thin layer there, as you can see, I'm assessing that by using my hand, and just applying again to the most raised areas. It's the same colour as our base coat. What we're essentially trying to do is use the shade to keep those shadows really locked in, and I'm just adding back on top to lighten up the highest points. You'll see I'm addressing the big open areas here to start off with, as that billowing cloak is nicely curved there, and as we speed up in a sec, you'll see that I'm really trying to catch the highest points at the top of his cloak where it folds up. Wherever there's a deep shadow, I'm leaving that with the shaded areas, and that's going to really add some depth to his cloak, and it's still a nice flat look, so it does look like a material. Once our paint dries, we should have a nice smooth material look. Okay, Stormbolter again. So, for those of you who watched the first video, you'll notice that we're going to use the same technique of edge highlighting. Storm bolters are fantastic because we can show two different methods for one weapon. So again, light amount on there. You'll see that again I've wetted my paint ever so slightly, make sure I've got a nice fine point, and to start off with I'm going to use the side brush technique, just scratching around the edges of our storm bolter there. Nice. It's a curved surface but we can go around it very nicely. Other side as well. There we go. Alright, so for this next bit I'm actually going to slow us back down, and as I do the next bit of edge highlighting I'm going to talk about how my hands are placed. Can you see I've paused it there? I've really got a firm grip, I'm smushing the model between my two hands and there's lots of contact between them. That's going to make it really easy to draw that straight line on that raised area. There's a bit of a corner on the right hand side of the bolter, but I'm highlighting it very nicely. So we're starting to get some nice detail on our captain here, but importantly those purity seals look a bit strange with nothing on. So I've got my nice fine brush here, keeping one very thin 0.1 for this special detail. As you can see, nice and wet, nice and thin. And just a quick one, loads of people I've seen try using Abaddon black for their purity seals. I prefer to use Corax. It gives you just a slightly more toned down and subtle approach. You can see the Abaddon is much harsher. So shake up, open up, and let's show you. So again, nice thin point. First things first, you need to make sure you don't have too much on your brush. As you can see there, if I tried to do some really small thin text, that would be quite a big font. So thin down the tiniest bit on your brush. Again, you can see on my palette there, I'm really trying to make sure the brush head is thin. I'm actually losing a bit of paint, so I'm going to put some more back on, and we're ready to do some writing. So nice firm grip again. You see both hands are braced. I'm going to start with this right hand purity seal. So my technique, if you can see without the blur on screen, all I'm trying to do is use the very tip of the brush. I've got a lot of practice at going in a straight line with my hand left to right. That will come with practice and again a nice steady grip, and all I'm trying to do is essentially scratch my way across, varying up the lengths of my scratches to give a bit of a variety in the text. Catching the back side of that purity seal there, all I'm trying to do is just make it look like the one behind isn't a blank one. You can start to see a little bit more of the variety, and a thumb in the way. Oopsie daisy. I think you get the idea. Unfortunately, needs a new cameraman, but we've added some intrigue to that purity seal. So you'll see this on most models. That's all they do a bit of text, but to make it even more exciting, we're going to thin down our brush again. I'm going to start to add some shapes towards our purity seals. Now there's a couple of ones that I've managed to get really used to. This one here is like the Inquisition eye. It is a purity seal after all, so it makes sense to have it on there, but the reason why I use this a lot of the time is because it's a really simple shape, nice straight lines, and once you've done a bit of practice, it's an easy one to achieve, but it just adds an extra detail to your purity seals. You'll see that I've done that nice in the center, and I've done that first. That then means I can go back to my scratch technique to make sure that the shape that I put in fits nicely on the seal. There we go, speeding up, cracking on with the rest. On this left hand side one, I'm actually going to do a bit of a dark angel symbol again, so that one's a bit more complicated, but it's something I've practiced a little bit, but it just adds a little bit more intrigue and it's better than some just writing across those seals. Okay, got some good looking seals, but just a nice easy win. What we're going to do is we're going to use some of our red paint here and very simply add some colour to those purity seals. So again, please excuse the thumb. just all I'm doing is adding a big red dot where I can find some decent looking space, splodge on there, very random, but it just adds that last little bit and really makes your purity seals just that extra tiny bit better. So we're going to keep our corn red out and we're going to do some more freehanding. So looking at this nice blank canvas here of a pauldron, what we're going to do is talk you through some freehand technique. So again, making sure that the paintbrush is a nice thin point and it's the right amount of wet. All I'm going to start doing is by bracing my hands together, drawing a straight line. There we go. So that's essentially the shape that I'm going to use to guide the rest of my freehanding around. There we are. No clues as to what it's going to be just yet, but all I'm doing is trying to make sure that the straight line there is equal on both sides, gently scratching my way up and down. You'll see I always do it in the same direction, and I always try and have lots of contact with my painting hand against the model. What I'm doing here is, because I've got a blank canvas, I'm wanting to make sure that it's nicely spaced out. So the top half of whatever I'm painting, I'm going to get that in there in this sort of diamond shape and attach it to the straight line that I've drawn. There we go. Those of you who play a certain Space Marine chapter may now know what I'm going for, but let's make it a little bit more obvious, shall we? Next up, simple shapes. I'm going to do an open semicircle. So we've now got a curved surface. So in some small scratching shapes, I'm going to do my best to make a rounded shape like that. That will take a bit of practice. And same thing the other side, but to make it easy, I'm going to flip the model round because I'm right-handed. Makes it easier for me. Judging there just to make sure that it's equidistant. Nice round curve. Yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. I think we're giving the game away to what the shape's going to be though. Just going to expand that out, following the original curve that I've done. Do that, and making sure, well, looks like we've got a bit of gloopy paint there. So important as I'm going along, making sure, refresh your paint, clean your brush off, fine point again. That'll just make it nice and easy to control. Same thing the other side. There we go, looking quite good. So as you can see, I'm painting what is quite a tricky shape here, but all I'm doing is actually just splitting it down into its component parts. So I've got straight lines, I've got curves. I'm trying my best to make sure that whatever I do, it's as simple as I can. Fortunately for this one, I've done it loads of times, and this is always the way that I paint it. There we go, starting to get some wings in there. Gonna go to the bottom to make sure that it's the right size, and then the next bit I'm going to do, right hand side, I'm going to make sure that each of the wings is nicely spaced out. So for me, I've done this a fair few times. What I find is the best thing to do is do an open hollow wing first. There we go, because I'm just trying to space it out with my eyes. That looks nicely spaced to me. Fill out the end and then fill the inside. Again, that works very well for this shape, but that's a principle that you can try and apply to any other freehand that you do. Always start with the overall simple shapes, fill up whatever blank canvas you're using, and then do your best to equally fill in the inside. That of course only works for nice thick shapes like our symbol here. Right, so our captain is starting to look pretty good, but we've got two blank tilt plates here. They definitely need some detail. So before I do any painting, what I'm actually going to do is talk about colours. Now we have our corn red here, but we've just painted a lot of red on there, and I think that would clash on that left hand tilt shield. Yellow kind of works. It would be separate from everything else, but I don't think that would contrast too well with our Deathwing armour. We've got our Corvus Black here. Yeah, it would definitely stand out, but it's a bit dark. I think the best thing to go for is probably our nice Caliban green here. We have used that already on the model, you can see on the cloak, so it ties in. Just got to be careful that it doesn't overlap with our Aquila in the centre here, because obviously you don't want one piece of your model merging into another. So, nicely prepped, paint's ready to go. Again, bit of freehand, so what I'm going to do is start off with my simple shapes. Nice braced hand, and I'm going to split the tilt shield in half and in half. So the whole time I'm painting here, I've got a picture up of some really cool heraldry, and what I'm actually basing this one off is the Leviathan launch box tilt shield. To be fair, they've got some really cool different shapes for me to show you, so I'm starting out with that simple quarter. Cool, refreshing our brush because we're going to be doing some really fine painting here, and what I'm going to be doing next is checkerboarding, which is a very tricky one to get used to. So again, I'm doing my best to start off with 2 straight lines to get the rough size of my squares, and again, I'm just doing this based off of by eye. You can, if you want to, if you're doing a bigger area, get a ruler out and a pencil, but for this, it's really small. I'm just going to base it off of eyesight. So leaving a gap in the centre there, trying to do the first row to start off with, and you can already see that the gap in the centre isn't quite perfect, but we'll come back to that. Just neatening up the second square there. There we go, and onto the second row. So I'm linking up the open square with my next one there, luckily just the one to paint, nice and easy, and onto my final row. Neatening up the top rows, and yeah, okay, checkerboards are looking okay. And there we have the rough idea for that left tilt shield. So just another thin layer of that green paint on the top right corner, and I'm actually going to leave it very nice and thin. Cool. Now, as I said, our checkerboard isn't perfect. All I'm going to simply do is go back with the undercoat. Just neaten up anything that's gone a bit too far with that green paint. You see that top square at the middle was a little bit too small, so I'm just readdressing that. There we go. There have been times where I've literally been back and forth, green, Ushabti, green, Ushabti, but that's looking nice and neat to me. Onto the other side, so just showing you how to do checkerboarding, this time nice and speedy. Going to do the top right hand side, and again this is based off of the launch box heraldry. Luckily this side actually seems to go pretty well. Cool, so as you can kind of start to tell, I am a glutton for punishment. Wherever there's space to do some freehanding and just waste time, I'm going to do it. So here I'm just adding some more Dark Angel's symbols, again in exactly the same technique as I did on his pauldron. This time I'm using Ushabti Bone, again trying to limit the amount of colours that I'm using on this captain. Wherever you can, try and use a colour you've already done, but that's going to contrast. So as we can see, this sort of light paint on the green cloak stands out nicely. Here I've tried to make sure that the Dark Angel symbols fit nicely in the corners, put them diagonally, and made sure that when I'm spacing it out, that it fits perfectly. There we are, both sides done. And to really punish myself, some straight lines on this really wobbly flowing cloak. So that literally all you can do is judge it by eye. Really thin, braced hand, nice lines, and if you overlap too much, just go back over with the green and fix your mistakes. Honestly, the amount of pro painters that fix mistakes, it's unreal. Okay, cloak's looking good, so let's address that sword. Now, this is a really simple technique that makes a sword look really fantastic easily. So, as you've seen, got my Corax white, got it ready to dry brush, and what I'm going to do is dry brush the tip. You can see I'm getting the top half, and I'm doing it in a diagonal pattern. I'm going to flip over the other side, slightly on the tip, but then where the pattern stopped at the top half, I'm catching the bottom. And what we're trying to mimic is the sheen of light on a really shiny sword. On the other side as well, exactly the same. Top half of the front of the tip. And once you're done with your Corax white, I use Ethermatic blue here, but you could use any other contrast colour, and just pop it on, and you should see the areas that you've dry brushed white will really pop with that blue. Alright, on to the most important part of our model, where he gets his personality, his face. So I've gone back to a very thin layer of our base coat there. So for that I'm using Guilliman Flesh, and I'm just readdressing some of the highlighted areas. So we're talking the cheeks, the nose, the eyebrows and the folds of his jowls here. I'm reusing the base coat because that means that our shade will just subtly highlight all of those recesses. And with a face, you don't want them to be really obvious. You want it to be subtle and transitioning nicely. And we've got 3 different coats that we're going to put on here to really highlight every little detail of this guy's face. Open areas like the forehead, that's kind of down to you to invent whatever you can. I tend to try and add on some forehead wrinkles, but moving on to Cadian flesh tone here, I'm going to readdress the face, same areas. You might find it's a bit silly basically going over exactly what you've done, but you do need to build it up. So the nose, I'm doing the very tip and giving him a bit of a highlighted bridge. Flared nostrils, and trying my best to not have the thumb in the way again, but onto the cheeks, jowls, and I'm just catching slightly less of the area each time, and of course a nice solid bum chin. That's something that really makes your model stand out, is a really strong chin. Eyebrows, and the section in between the eyebrows, again you'll notice my models tend to follow the same sort of pattern with their faces. They're always quite strong eyebrows and they've got dimples here and there, but they just add some extra interest to their face. There we are, already looking quite a lot better. Cool, what I'm doing here is just readdressing with that second coat. I've let the first coat dry, again very thin, just the real highlights. Now, before I do the final skin tone, I'm going to pop out my Corax white. Got a very thin dot of paint there, and to get myself eye in, I'm going to start off with his teeth here. Teeth are slightly easier to do than the eyes, and I'm just going to catch top set and the bottom set. Scratching my paintbrush across, just like I would do with those purity seals, nice and gently. And you can see I've probably put a bit too much on the bottom jaw there, but that's why I've waited to do that final skin tone. Lastly, we'll go on to the eyes, really gently trying to poke them in there. That's something that comes with tons of practice and the tiniest dot of white paint that you can get. Here what I've done is I've tilted him to make sure that I can get the easiest access between the 2 eyelids, and as you can see that's quite a fine area to get your paintbrush into. Refreshing the paintbrush because we're doing such fine detail, tiny dot, and then onto the other side. Kind of hard to get into this side because you've got the armour in the way, but there we go. Time to bust out the Corvus Black again. This time we're looking at the teeth. So all I'm doing is just with a tiny dot, scratching in between, guessing you're not going to be a perfect dentist and having the beautiful Ken doll lines of teeth. Just do your best to scratch some individual lines on there. Trust me, you can see some very interesting historical GW models. And unfortunately, the camera work has let me down again. As you can see, I have put an eyeball in there, but yeah, all I'm doing is just having the finest dot, refreshing my paintbrush between each one, and really just trying to poke, and I mean just gently poke a black dot on his eyes. There we go. So as I said, onto the final layer of skin, readdressing, and you can see I'm aiming for the same points again. So the tip of the nose, the flared nostrils, but this time I'm only catching the very tops of each of those elements. Eyebrows, you can see I'm doing some circular bits just to give him some really puffy eyebrows, just a bit more detail. Onto the cheeks, I'm trying to give them a bit of a fold, and then we'll follow around all the rest of the detail, the jowls, etc. Missing just the bridge under his nose, and as you can see, lovely strong bum chin, and I use my paint to just rectify that white bit that spilled over. And next up, whilst we're on the face, all I'm going to do is add a little bit of silver to his campaign medals on his forehead there. 2 little dots, nicely raised, to just draw some little circles around them. So our captain for this whole time has been standing on a big blank bit of space there. So all I'm going to do is add some detail on there, starting off with some astrogranite texture paint on where the Tyranid head used to be, with Dawnstone on this rubbly section, and just to add some extra colour in, I'm going to use Castellan green on the back bit that he's standing on. Those of you who are super observant will notice the next bit I kind of forgot to film some of this bit, but the basing isn't the important part. So just adding a ton of shade on there to make sure it's nice and detailed. Okay, so we have a bit of time whilst our shade is drying, so all I'm going to do here is add a little bit of interest to our freehand. So I'm using this lighter red paint to highlight our freehand Dark Angel symbol there. I'm catching what would normally be the raised area if this was a 3D object, and highlighting where the light would hit, so upper edges of all the shapes. Nice and gently, same braced strong hand technique. Once I've done that, I'm going to introduce a bit of chipping. Now, it seems a bit silly because you've gone through all the effort to make sure it's perfect, but to make it look realistic, we're just going to scratch on in some random patterns some of the base Wraithbone coat. Little dots here and there, straight lines up through. Think about where a line of movement would go, so as if he was battling away, being scratched at by some Tyranids, just randomly up to you. There we go, all the way around, a bit more realistic. Okay, so what I've got here is some printed out little signs. All I've done there is just go onto Microsoft Word, Google imaged some Warhammer posters, and I'm just folding them up a little bit to give them a little bit of a more realistic look. So fresh poster, folding it up, and you can see I've torn away the corner of one of them, and with a tiny bit of PVA glue I'm going to stick that onto my base. It's such a great simple technique. As long as you've made sure that the posters are to the right scale, it really just adds that extra little bit of detail and makes them really look like there's some cluster on the ground. Make sure they're nicely sealed down with our PVA. So for the final part of the base, please forgive me if you don't own an airbrush. I know it annoyed me for ages when I didn't have one, but I'm simply going to load it up with some thinner and some red paint, mix it in nicely, and then we're going to try and make it look like this captain is stood on a rock surrounded by lava. So I've got my mixture to the right amount, checking that it flows nicely, and then with a test shot, looks good to me, ready to go onto the base. So I'm using my airbrush to start off with, trying to get a nice coverage around the base, making sure that where it is flat open space, It's a nice flat red, and I'm carefully working my way up this rock. You can see the way that I'm holding the airbrush. I'm angling the Terminator Captain away from me, and I'm trying to mimic the line of what the lava would see. There we go. Next up, we're going to use a lighter orange colour here. This is the one that's really going to make it start popping. Mix it up nicely. Make sure the flow's working. And all I'm going to do is start off by highlighting the open areas there. I'm going to leave a little bit of red really close up to that rock where the magma would have cooled. And just testing, make sure it's nice and happy. And then once I'm good with the actual lava itself, we're going to start adding the glow. Final colour, nice bright yellow, mix it up. And this time again, we're going to make sure that once it's flowing well, we're going to add the glow slightly further up the base. This one I'm actually going to use to seal in that glow and cover over a little bit of the gap between the red and orange. All the way round, angling down on the base to start off with, but then angling it away from me to make it look like that glow is as it should be. And adding some of that glow onto our model on his legs there. Final task to do is simply add a colour to the rim. Now I chose this nice drab colour because it works with a ton of different armies that I've chosen, and yeah, you guys choose your own. 2 thin coats, looking great. Ready for the final reveal? Our Terminator Captain from Leviathan. Really happy with how this guy came out. I was a bit worried that I wasn't going to be able to customize him too much and it wasn't going to look Dark Angels-y, but I'm really happy that just the slight touches that I've added to mine look really good, and there were plenty of places to whack that beautiful symbol on. Now I really hope you enjoyed the video, as it's taken forever to put together, but let me know what you think, either about the painting or yeah, putting the video together. Would be great to hear from you. Hi guys, thanks for watching again. Really hope you enjoyed this one. It's quite a difficult one to put together, but yeah, if you did, like and subscribe.